everybody, I'm Chef Dawn Parrott. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about my new icing, ultra fine royal icing. What's the difference? Well, the main difference is it is so fine you no longer have to strain, you just mix it and work with it. I'm going to talk to you about properly mixing it up and some uses for it right now. So you just want to have a regular mixer with a paddle. I prefer not to use a whisk because we don't want to have extra air in your icing. You want to delete any possibility of air, makes your icing stronger. You're going to need a scale. You're going to measure your water and your icing. So we want to make sure you get the right amounts. We're going to do a small batch today. It's 100 grams of the powdered mix with 13 grams of water. Now your 13 mils in grams are going to be the same roughly in weight, but to keep it easy for yourself, just go ahead and keep your scale on grams. It's the easiest way to measure this icing. So you're going to go ahead and put your measuring or your bowl, whatever you're using, on your scale. Make sure you tare it out to 0. You want to make sure you're keeping the exact amounts on here. If it does get too thin, you can always add a little bit more powdered mix back into it, or if it's too stiff, add a drop of water at a time. So each spoonful is roughly about 15 to 20 grams right now. So we're going to bring it up to 100. The first thing you're going to notice is how fine it is. It literally puffs up like a little cloud. So I do recommend doing it with a spoon versus pouring it. When you pour it, it tends to create quite a bit of mist, or looks like mist, I should say. So there we go, we're just over 100, perfect. So you've got 100 grams of my powdered mix. And I've already scaled my water, so I've got 13 grams of water in here. Now I go ahead and add my water in, but instead of putting it straight to the mixer, I use my paddle and mix it by hand. Remember I talked about how fine it is? If you put it in that mixer and turn it on, it's going to be this big puff of smoke. So it's good to get it started just by hand. Go ahead and get most of it incorporated. So we're going to go ahead and mix some. You'll see it'll start to mix up, and you'll know pretty quick if it's enough water. I found so far 13 grams works really well for me. It depends on where you live. If you live in somewhere with high humidity or a very dry area, it may not. You may need a couple drops more. As you can see, this is pretty thick. So I may just put a couple more drops in there. And when I say drops, I mean like literal drops. Use your spoon and put a couple drops in there, because it doesn't take much to change the amount, the consistency and the amount that's in there. So now with that on there, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in your mixer. You're going to want to put it at a fairly low speed. You don't want to over whip this icing. So you just want to basically mix it. So I'm just going to put it on low. And you're going to have it mix for maybe 2 minutes. You can do a little bit less. You're going to notice it mixed well, it's going to turn white. It gets really, really bright white. And when it dries pure white. You just want to get it mixed enough that you've got the right consistency and texture that you're looking for, which we'll show you in a minute. And you just want to make sure that, like I said, you don't over whip it. I can't stress not over whipping the icing. So I like to mix it a bit and then go ahead and scrape it down. So you can see it's still got a little bit of icing in here, the dry powdered mix itself. So make sure you get all that off and get into the icing. This is a good time to check it and make sure it's not going to be too stiff. Mix it up, scrape it up so you can see. So you see this is quite stiff. I find personally that you want to use it with a stiffer consistency. It just tends to work better. But I like this is looking really good for consistency. And you're going to notice another thing about my icing is that it dries a lot faster than regular royal. So when you're trying to make those pieces like lace points, string work, any of those fine detail pieces, it's going to dry a lot faster. Just going to mix it again for just a couple minutes. It seems to be going pretty quick here, so I'm not going to let it mix for probably much more than about a minute. It's looking like it's got a good color, good consistency. I just want to make sure there's no little bits left in there, because the better it's mixed, the better it's going to come through your tip. All right. This is looking good. All right, so you can see it's real smooth. And you see how much more white it is. It looks a little bit yellow when you first start. I notice as it turns white, it's getting to the point I want it. So you can just go ahead and take this icing out. We're going to get a piping bag ready, and I'm going to show you some little tips with it. So now we're going to take our icing and put it in the bag. We talked about paddling, so I'm going to show you how to do the paddling. So just take a little bit of your icing. You don't want too much at a time because you don't want to overfill your bags. So you just take a couple paddleful here. And literally paddling is what it says. You're just going to take that ice and you're going to back and forth, and you're paddling the air bubbles out of the icing. This is really important, especially when you're doing things like string work, pressure piping, little delicate pieces like lace points, because if you get the air bubbles in the icing and they remain in the icing, it could cause them to be brittle and they'll break, especially like the domes, any kind of the filigree pieces that you're going to pick up. You want to have it stronger. So getting rid of this air is definitely going to help. So you're just literally smushing it down. Of course, obviously we can only work it for so long. It is royal. We don't want it to dry out. So scrape it up. Take your piping bag and then just put that icing in. So depending on how big your hand is, again, usually you don't want more icing than can fill your hand. Be careful not to overfill your bags. That's going to cause too much pressure on your hand. Obviously that's a little bit. Little icing is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than too much icing. So you don't want to have too little, because then you start squeezing with these two fingers. When you squeeze with these two fingers, you use a smaller muscle in your hand. That's carpal tunnel. You always want to squeeze with your whole hand, because then you're using the largest muscle in your arm. So you're trying to really be careful and watch to take care of those hands. You only get one set, so try not to hurt them. So just remember, it can fit comfortably in the palm of your hand and close over. That's what you want to have. Now, if you're someone who suffers from carpal tunnel or you have weak hands, you can go a little bit lower, have a little bit less icing in your bag. Again, just be careful not to do too little, because you're going to injure that small muscle in your hand. So just really be careful about that. The other option is you could always lighten the icing a little bit, add a bit more water to it, and then that way you'll also protect your hands. I'm going to see how much I got in there. That's not a bad amount. So you can see I've got about this much in here. I would say it's probably about 2 to 3 tablespoons. And the way you test is twist it. You can see I'm going to hold. I can squeeze with all 4 fingers. So if it was any less than that, I'd end up squeezing with a smaller one. As it gets lower and people start to use those 2 fingers, that's what makes your hand tired. You want to be real careful of that. But now with paddling it, there should be no bubbles left in this icing. So when I start to pipe, we should have nice clean lines, nice smooth lines. So we're just going to clean up our boards. I'm going to show you a few small techniques on how to use this great icing. Now that you've got your icing in your bag and ready to go, we're going to do a little bit of pressure piping just to show you the behavior of the icing. Another little tip I wanted to show you: when I load my bags with icing, I always want to check and make sure all my icing is pushed down. Somewhere over the years I started doing this, and it's still my favorite. If you flatten your bag out nice and flat, take a bench scraper and push the icing. You're going to get all your icing down into the bag, keeping your bag clean. That's really helpful, especially in royal icing, because with royal icing, you've got those little bits that dry. So you want to make sure you eliminate as much of that as possible. So I'm going to grab my PME tip 2 to start with. And grab the right one. I'm going to grab a 2. Depending on what you're making will determine the size of your tip. I'm only going to do a very small little cherub type thing right now. So I'm going to start with a 2. We may change them back and forth as needed. I pressure pipe a little bit differently than most people. What I do is find a picture. So what I found was this picture of this cute little cherub online that had been piped. And what I do for teaching this, the easiest way to teach it is to have a protector sheet, essentially. It's my favorite thing to pipe on, and just put over the picture. Now, you're not putting the picture in the protector sheet because you are going to need to move it and check it several times. So you want to make sure it's loose. Don't put it inside your sheet. So when you pressure pipe, the thing you're doing is you're piping anything in the background first. So whatever is the furthest away is the first thing you're going to pipe. So for this one, it's going to be the back foot and the back wing. So I'm going to use my tip 2. You're literally just going to squeeze and let it build into a teardrop and come down. Okay, and then the back foot. I'll worry about the details later. Right now, I'm more worried about just the shape. So the heel and the leg. Now here's where I probably differ than most people. You're taking that damp paintbrush. Again, I love to use a paintbrush. Some people think you shouldn't need to use a paintbrush, but this is where you can manipulate the icing a little. And if you need any kind of smoothing out, your little bit of water helps. Again, make sure it's not too wet, but you can see how I can smooth that out and help get the shape that I want. Just a little bit of pressure. So to make sure I got the heel, doing the curve of the foot. Okay, so that's the back parts. So then you keep looking at it and you're always trying to figure out what's in the background, what's in the foreground. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the second part of the wing, which is going to build up a little over the top there. Come down. You want it to obviously be something that's in front of the other. If you've got any kind of marks in your icing that you don't like, you can very easily smooth it out right now. Sometimes with feathers, you can take a paintbrush with a real fine tip and put almost like little strokes in there like a feather would have. This is your chance to kind of make special additions on there. So there's the wing. I'm going to go ahead and start with the actual pedestal that they're sitting on, because I think I want to be able to make sure that my little cherub is taller than the pedestal. So I'm going to start with the very center one. I'm going to pipe a couple layers of this as well because I want it to appear rounded when it's done. And I'll show you how I'm going to achieve that. So right now just straight lines to get that column effect. Kind of that, I guess it's a Grecian pillar kind of look that they were going for. I'm not worried about the lines in the middle, and you're going to understand why in just a second. Because I'm going to pipe right where the two meet and give it a bit of depth. So this will help give it the appearance of being like a column. Okay, so now we've got a little bit of depth on there. So now what you're gonna do, I'm gonna get a larger tip out for the actual base of these, because I just want to do a couple of lines without it being too thick. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a tip 3, I believe. Should work. I'm gonna set my tip down so it doesn't dry out real quick, because I know I'm gonna come back to that too shortly. So I'm just going to pipe like a short line across the bottom, and then a slightly longer one. And then, of course, we never want to have any pointy bits. Always careful at wherever you end off, you want to make sure it's nice and clean. But that's giving me the look that I want. I'm going to probably put a small one up on the top where those meet. Remember, you don't have to have it exactly like the picture. You're the only person who saw your picture that you started with for inspiration. So don't overthink it. Piping should be enjoyable. I find it how I relax. I know everybody's probably snickering right now, but I find it very therapeutic, very relaxing. As you can see, I've got that effect of the pillar, and I didn't overthink it. It wasn't hard. I just went ahead and went for it. So now where the pieces, I have to think about this, the vertical pieces meet the horizontal pieces, I'm just going to go ahead and pipe a number 2 line just over them, just to clean it up. And as you can tell, I'm not looking at the picture for any of this. The picture is just my guide to give me a rough design. I'll just add things in and out as I feel once I start piping it. But that just cleans it up nicely, finishes it. Okay, so there's our actual little column. Now the column actually has another piece, but I'm going to bring the cherub down a little bit lower because I don't want to add to that column. It's going to be too big. So I think what I'm going to start with next, I'm going to start with the actual body. Now, here's where it's going to look really funky for a while because I'm just going to let the icing build up. I'm not worried about how it looks too much right now because I'm going to fix this. But I want it rounded. It's got to come out a little higher than my column. Again, remember you're thinking about that depth perception, so make sure you're getting the effect like it would be sitting up on the column. I'm not going to get the arm up there yet. I like to use the paintbrush a lot. And I know old school methods you didn't. You would use the icing itself. But I find a paintbrush allows me to put fabric movements in there, sometimes muscles. It's really easy to get the muscle looks if you're doing, like, especially Grecian statues, things of that nature. You can actually get muscles, the movement. So I'm just basically blending it right now. This icing is pretty stiff, so I'm going to need to work with it. But you can already see it's higher than our actual columns. So the depth is right. Little shoulder. I'm going to be adding pieces of fabric over this. So I'm not making it perfect. I'm just going to get it roughly where I want it. And then I'm going to add the pieces, the actual flow of the fabric. So by pushing the icing around, see I'm getting like, it looks like drapes of fabric. May not be the traditional method, but it works. Okay, now I'm going to put the other leg on. Yeah, so we always want our next one to be in front of the other. So we're thinking about, again, that depth and how it would sit. So this foot's going to be on the other one. I'm bringing the leg up. I always add things like the toes and little details like that after I get the basic shapes all done, because you can go back. It gives the icing a bit of time to dry, and then you can go in and just pipe with like a 0 or a 00, little things like toes and fingers and hair. But you want to give it a chance to dry out. It usually looks a little better that way. And then we've got the arm and the shoulder. So the arm, obviously you want to have the arm a little bit higher. So you see I'm building this on after. Coming up. What you definitely want to see with your piping, if you're trying to do this pressure piping type effect, you want to see the depth of the layers. So it's important to make sure one sits on the other. And that's another reason, this is why I use stiffer icing at this point than you're probably accustomed to using. It just makes your work easier because it's going to sit where you need it to sit first. But you can see, hopefully, by camera here, that this little bit of water, it's really smoothing out this icing, but I'm being real careful not to use too much. Okay. So now with the clothing, this is where you can add little bits of fabric. So this one can end there. If you didn't have enough icing on there, you just add some in. But it's real easy to blend and just add in this layer of icing to make it appear like it's a piece of fabric. Piping fabric is actually one of my favorite things to pipe. I love putting the movement in there. But make sure you blend, because you want it to be realistic. You don't want it to look like separate pieces of piping. You just want it to look like it literally could have been a piece of fabric. A couple more little drapes of fabric. Yeah, we're going to blend those in. We've got the cherub's little, I don't know if it's a toga or what you call a cherub wears. My little angel, I guess. It's going to be just blended along. You can have as much or as little as you like. I mean, I like a lot of cherubs don't even wear clothing. So you can find a picture. The key is find a picture that it's not as intimidating, but definitely one that has a bit of depth to it. It really helps in you being able to achieve the finished look. If you can see like what starts in the back versus what's in the forefront, that's going to be a good thing for you to start with. Now for the head, I just pipe the general shape first. Add the details in after. It always looks really weird at the beginning. But blend your neck into the body. I'm not going to worry too much about the back because I'm putting hair on there. But you definitely want to have a bit of build-up there because you want to be able to get some of the cheekbones, a nose. So you definitely want to try to have some depth. So this is where you start kind of getting the shape it a little bit. Of course, there'll be an ear since this one's sideways. I like to try to figure out where the cheekbone will rest. And you want to take a bit of hollowness around the eye area. It doesn't have to be fully hollow, but it's nice if you can have it indented to create a bit more natural look. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not the greatest person at faces. Just not. That's the hardest part I have is with faces. I like sideways faces for that particular reason. Okay, I'm going to get a tip one. Some of the little details. It's got a little bird in their hand. So essentially for the bird, I'm just going to pipe an elongated tear. With the second one. Now you can make this as detailed as you want. I just want it to be kind of fairly simple because my focus is not going to be on the bird, it's on the cherub itself. So for the hair, you can do multiple things. I could generally like to do kind of just some curls, just letting it fall curly. Just rotate your wrist. And build it up as much or as little as you like. There we go. Definitely want to pipe a little ear in there. So just remember to blend things in so they look a bit more natural. So this is where I start putting on my little toes. So we got add your little dots for toes. Sometimes I don't make it to 5 because they're too little. But as long as you've got some in there, make them look real. It's kind of more to have fun with it than anything. Don't, like I said, don't overthink it. Pressure piping is more about just the control of your hand and how much you're squeezing the bag to the size of what you're trying to make. It's really about memory control for your hand. So just focus on your actual piping itself, not so much the picture. So I'm going to try and put on make it look like I've got some little fingers on here. You can see I rely quite a bit on the paintbrush, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it just makes it a lot easier to get the details that I know sometimes these tips are just too big for. I'm going to add a little bit in here to blend in for a cheek. I feel like it doesn't have enough depth in the face. Sometimes you'll have to let it dry a little bit, like the mouth part may need to dry before I can do too much more with it. But let's see. So you can see in a couple minutes, that's not too bad for just a couple minutes work. So when you do your pressure piping, you just take your time. As I said, it's all about hand control. You're trying to learn the strength of your hand. also what your tips can and can't do. If you're doing a buildup of items and you're finding it's really shaky looking, it could be that you need to go to a bigger tip. If your strength is not there in your hand, go to a larger tip to stop that shaking. Also, it could mean you need to lighten your icing a little bit. Maybe your icing is too stiff. So don't be afraid to play with it and try a few different ways to make it work. But as you can see, you can have a lot of fun and make a lot of things with icing.